International Business Communication. My name is Aradhna Malik. I am an assistant professor at Vinod Gupta School of Management, IIT Kharagpur, and it's a pleasure to be in this course. To start with, let's talk about the course objective. The primary objective of this course is to help you enhance your sensitivity to your environment and develop your own unique style of becoming effective in international corporate interactions. The reason I say this is because I'm not going to give you any patchwork. Business communication is not about patches. It is not about any sort of formulae to deal with the international business environment, but it is the tools that you need to deal with the different kinds of signals coming at you from your respective environments. Communication is dynamic. Communication is ongoing. Nobody can map the entire gamut of stimuli you will be getting from your environment. Nobody can tell you what you will be exposed to in your entire lives. All we can do is help you find out what is coming at you from your environment and help you develop your own unique strategies to deal with it in your own unique ways, to deal with it effectively. And that is what I will teach you in this course. The description of the course is as follows. The course will be covered in 40 sessions, and every session will be 1 hour long. There are a few books that I will be using to design this course. The first book is called Management Communication, a Case Analysis Approach, the second edition, designed by or written by James O'Rourke and Anubhav Singh. This is published by Pearson Education. It's available in India, and this is 2006. The details are on the slides. So I suggest you buy this book from a good bookstore. It should be available in good Indian bookstores. You can purchase this book and follow it. It's very, very good. The second book I will be using is called Business Communication Design, Creativity, Strategies and Solutions by Pamela Angel. This is a McGraw-Hill publication. This is again the second edition, published in 2007. This, I'm not sure whether you would be able to find this book in India or not, but maybe you can ask your library to purchase it. Another book that I will be using, this book is specifically for intercultural communication. This book is called Experiencing Intercultural Communication, an Introduction. This is by Judith Martin and Thomas Nakayama. Again, a McGraw-Hill publication, and this was published in 2005. Again, the second edition. I'm not sure if a new edition is out. If it is, I suggest you find the newest edition possible and purchase it. Martin and Nakayama are well-known authors in intercultural communication. This book is very good for basics of intercultural communication. Another book that I will be using to design your coursework is called Intercultural Communication, a Reader by Larry Samovar and Richard Potter. Samovar and Potter are editors of this book. This is the 7th edition. I have the 7th edition. You may be able to find the latest edition. This book is a collection of readings. If you look at the table of contents, the book is a collection of readings, and every article has been written by a different person. For example, the first or the couple of readings in the first chapter are called Communication in a Global Village, which has been written by Dean Barland. Cultural Identity and Intercultural Communication by Dr. Mary Jane Collier. So Dr. Collier was my teacher. So, you know, every chapter has sections which have been written by different people. So it's like a collection of the best possible inputs on every aspect by the authorities on that subject. There's a section by Edward T. Hall called Context and Meaning over here. So it's as good as getting the best, retrieving the articles from the best possible journals, from the most reputed journals, and putting them together as books. Another book that I will be using for this course is called Bridges Not Walls, a book about interpersonal communication. I have the 8th edition. You may be able to find another later edition. This has been edited by John Stewart. This is again a McGraw-Hill publication. Seems like McGraw-Hill publishes some of the best books in communication. So again, this book is also a collection of readings by different people, and this covers a lot about interpersonal communication. Now I'll be drawing most of my lectures from these books. In addition to these books, I will be referring to different research papers from time to time, and I'll let you know what I refer to. It will all be in this set of readings that will be given to you at the end of every class or along with the syllabus. So that is what I'll be using to design this course. The class requirements. I suggest whenever you listen to these lectures, you read what has been assigned, you listen to the lecture, you go through the slides, you reflect, you think about whatever is being taught, and then you discuss it with your peers. And then if you have any questions, find a person who can respond to those questions. If you have a teacher, you can ask your teachers, or you can also write to the authors of the papers you have questions about, or you can find out who the experts in that discipline are and you can write to them. 9 times out of 10, at least this has been my experience, that if you have a question about a specific research paper and you write to the author, 9 times out of 10 you will get a response. So it's always a good idea to get in touch with the authors of papers and find out if you don't understand something or if you need clarification on something. Now let's move on to the actual course at hand. The first thing we'll talk about is communication. What is communication? According to Dr. Frank Dance, communication is acting upon information. It's as simple as that. We communicate to act upon information. We act on a stimulus that is coming at us from our environment. We receive the stimulus, we make sense of it, and then depending on our understanding of the stimulus and our understanding of what is required, we respond to the stimulus. So that is what we mean when we say that communication is acting upon information. Why do we communicate? Various theorists, behavioral theorists, scientists have tried to give a response to this. We communicate according to Mead. We communicate to respond to the stimuli. It's as simple as that. We get something from the environment, we are forced to respond to it. Any stimulus elicits a response. According to Abraham Maslow, there is a behavioral motivation of needs, which means we communicate to fulfill our needs. Now all of these theories have been subject to critiques. There are people who have come forth and given us more information about these theories, but from whatever was available to these theorists, they came out with these different interpretations of why we communicate. Dance and Larson, 1972, say that we communicate to link ourselves with our environment, which means we communicate in order to connect with every single or with the different elements in our environment. They also say that we communicate to develop our higher mental processes, and the third reason why we communicate is to regulate our behavior. Barbara Wood, who's a child psychologist, says, with special reference to children, she says we communicate to make sense of our worlds. Now this is something we see in our day-to-day lives. When we see children, you think of a little baby, think of a little child who is trying to make sense of his world. How does the communication start in the first place? A little baby is born, and then that baby lets out a cry, and the first time the baby cries, the first time the baby feels a need, the baby lets out a cry, and depending on the response the baby gets, the second cry is different. So the first time a baby cries, the mother tries to feed the baby, and if after being fed the baby still cries, the mother tries to think what is going on, and then she checks the baby's diaper to see if the baby is wet, and then if the baby is wet, she changes the diaper, the baby stops crying. So the baby realizes that if I send out one kind of cry, this is the kind of response I'll get. The next time I want my diaper changed, I will have to modify the way I cry to some extent. So that is how babies learn to make sense of their world. That is how mothers try to understand the language of their babies. That is how all of us respond to new situations. We can extrapolate that baby's experience to all our experience in our daily lives. Any new situation we have, we communicate like that. We find ourselves in a new situation, we send out a mild signal. We try and find out what the environment is all about by sending out these signals, and we form an impression about our environment by the kinds of feedback we receive from our environment. So when we send out a signal, it elicits a response, and once we get that response, we realize how comfortable or uncomfortable we are with that response, and based on that sense of comfort or discomfort, we decide whether we want to communicate in a particular fashion or not. We also form an impression about how comfortable the environment is, or what is it like. We also form an impression about what our environment is like based on the kinds of signals we receive. So all these definitions fit the reasons, or they explain why we communicate. Going back to Dance and Larson's definition, Dance and Larson say that we communicate to link ourselves with our environment. Now many times you may have noticed that when you send a signal into the environment, sometimes people respond, sometimes people don't respond, but many times people respond in certain ways, and you form an idea about the kinds of connections you are making with your environments. So we link ourselves. Sometimes people do not want to respond to our signals, but whenever they respond to our signals positively, some sort of connection is formed, and then based on that connection we start our future interactions with them, maybe immediately, maybe after a while. They also say we develop higher mental processes. We communicate to develop higher mental processes, which means that whenever we send signals into the environment, we get some feedback. Now that feedback that we get from our environment stimulates something in our mind, and that stimulation leads to clarifications. It leads to our ability to explore further, and that is the way that's very, very crudely explaining how we develop our further mental processes. It also leads to the regulation of behavior, which is what I was talking about regarding positive and negative experiences. If we send a signal into our environment and we get a response that is comfortable for us, then we send out stronger signals along the same lines, of the same nature. But if we get a response that is not as comfortable, then we slowly taper down that communication and or that kind of stimulus into the environment. And if the response that we get is very unfavorable, we just stop sending it. So it regulates our behavior. Okay? So that is why we communicate, and in order to regulate other people's behavior, we send out signals and let them know how comfortable we are with their signals. So that is how we regulate the behavior of the environment around us. We let the environment around us know whether we are comfortable with it or not, whether we are really fitting in with it or not, and that is how we, that is why we communicate. Okay. How does communication happen? Communication happens on a very basic level. Communication happens by transmitting a message that carries a particular meaning in a particular context, and receiving a message and deriving meaning from it in a particular context, which means that we communicate by sending a message that is loaded, that is encased in a meaning within a particular context, and then the person at the other end receives the message and derives the meaning from it in a particular context, and this is how communication happens. It is not just a transference and reception of signals, it is communication in its entirety. Communication encased in context. Goody Kunst, another very, very leading theorist in intercultural communication, says that only messages can be transmitted, not meanings. And he is right. You think about your own lives. Many times you say, I did not mean to say what you interpreted. So this is what we mean when we say only messages can be transmitted. I can only transfer words. I can give you something in writing, or I can say something. What you make of what I say depends on you. Now I am standing here talking about communication, and I gave you the introduction as I teach communication. If I just came out of the blue and I started talking to you about communication, or I told you I had a degree in home science, which I really do, and I did not tell you about my training in communication, would you believe me? When I talk to you about intercultural communication, would you believe me? Probably not. So I'm standing here talking with authority. I'm giving you all these fancy names. I'm telling you about all these theories. I'll tell you more theories in future. So only messages can be transmitted. If I were to just put all of this down in words, it would probably seem like a very boring essay to you. And that wouldn't really hold any meaning unless I repeated, unless I added some sort of tonal variation to it. It would not hold the same meaning to you. Let me give you another example. I had an interesting experience when I came to IIT Kharagpur. And what happened was, I went to the library to get my library card made, and the librarian asked me what my name was, and I said, he looked at my slip. So when I joined, I went there to get my library card made. He looked at my slip and he said, oh, Aradhana Malik. And I said, yes. And he said, he motioned that I sit down, and then he started talking to me in Bengali, because he assumed just by looking at my name, I did not say anything. I was dressed like a professor. He looked at my slip that had been given to me from the office, and he started talking to me in Bengali. Now I am not a Bengali, but Malik is a very common Bengali name. So the message that was transmitted was, she is a Bengali, she is new to IIT Kharagpur, let me make her feel welcome by speaking to her in the regional language. She may feel more comfortable. And I said, huh? And he thought that I was hard of hearing, so he started talking loudly. And then I realized what had happened, and I said, I'm sorry, but no Bangla, please. And then he looked at my slip and he said, Malik, no Bangla? I said, this is a Punjabi Malik, it's not a Bengali Malik, so please don't use Bangla. So, you know, the meaning that went just by that one last name. Malik is a common name in Punjab, in Haryana, in Bengal, and in other places also. But he assumed immediately that I need to feel her, make her feel welcome. She's brand new to this place. So, you know, so the meaning went across. I did not utter a word. I had to then clarify that I was not a Bengali. So that is what we mean when we say only messages can be transmitted. The message that went across was, she is a local. And the meaning had to be clarified later. Now, meanings are derived and created in shared contexts. We create meanings. How do we know that the color behind me is blue? Somebody gave it a name. How do you know that the kind of embroidery I am wearing on my dupatta is kantha, or the embroidery on my kurta is different? Somebody gave it that name. I could mix and match. I could add paint to it and give it a brand new name. So, you know, we create these meanings. We create new things. How do we know that this little plastic thing over here is known as a monitor? Somebody decided to call it a monitor. Okay, this did not exist when our parents were growing up. Maybe 50 years ago, they did not have the concept of a computer monitor. What do we call this? This is a mouse. Now, about 20 years ago, somebody may have said that a mouse is an ordinary rodent in your house. Somebody decided to call this little piece of plastic as a mouse, because it can just move anywhere on the screen, just like a mouse moves randomly. You know, if a mouse needs to go somewhere, it goes there, doesn't care what it's hitting on the way, there's no strict path. So this, somebody decided to make some sort of connection and call this little plastic piece over here as a mouse. And then we all started using this terminology. But till this mouse came in, we did not know what a mouse is or what a computer mouse could be. You know, we would not have had a name for it till somebody coined it and explained the meaning to everybody. And then we started saying, okay, this is a mouse, and what the ordinary rodent that most of us are scared of in our house is also a mouse. So meanings are derived and created in shared contexts. The first time an electronic computer mouse was designed, maybe only the people who were designing this mouse called it a mouse. Okay? And slowly, when it started being accepted and the meaning was explained, the shared context was extended to other people. It was called a mouse by other people who started understanding the same context and sharing the meanings that were created in the same context. The more similar the context, going back to the slide, the more similar the context, the simpler it is to derive the meaning within a shared context. Okay? The more similar the context, the simpler it is to derive the same meaning from the same message or create a shared meaning within a shared context. This is the basis for modern day intercultural communication competence. Now let's take the example of the languages we speak. In Bengal, we speak Bengali. In Punjab, we speak Punjabi. In Gujarat, we speak Gujarati. What is so different? In the Netherlands, we speak Dutch. In Italy, people speak Italian. People speak different languages. They have the same kinds of things. Same human beings, same 2 hands, 2 arms, 2 ears, 1 nose, 1 mouth. We have different names. Okay? Now, how do people come up with these names? And how do they connect? If I said to somebody, maybe some Italian, if I said, ye mera haath hai, in Hindi, this is my hand. Maybe a person who did not understand Hindi would not understand what I was talking about. Or if I said, okay, what is this? And some Italian asked me, what is this? And I said, ghadi. How would a person know what I am talking about? Unless the person understood Hindi, which means the similar context has to be there. There has to be a similar sort of understanding. In common terms, we say that we need to be on the same page. The more we are on the same page, the easier it is to create meanings with links to that same page. Okay? The easier it is for us to understand things on that same page. We all have our unique experiences, but we have more similarity with certain people than with others. And this is the basis for modern day intercultural communication competence. Modern day intercultural communication competence rests on the principle that some similar pages have to be created before we can start communicating with people from other cultures. We need to create a similarity between our contexts. Okay, there's one more thing that I would like to share with you, and that is Berlow's model of communication. Berlow's SMCR model, that is the source, message, channel, receiver model, talks about the involvement of all of these elements in the process of communication. And according to Berlow, the source that is encased in the sources, the kind of message a source designs is dependent upon the communication skills of the source, is dependent upon the attitudes of the source, is dependent upon the knowledge of the source, the social system of the source, and the culture of the source. And based on all of these attributes, the source designs or encodes a message into a language, or into words, or into non-verbal signals. And this message is then has its own content. It has elements that are treated, they have a structure, and a code is designed, which is the language. This message is then sent through a channel, And that channel could be hearing, seeing, touching, smelling, tasting, whatever. And then the receiver decodes the message that has been sent to him. And the reception of the message depends upon the receiver's communication skills, the receiver's attitudes, the receiver's knowledge, the receiver's social system, and the receiver's culture. So this model is again very, very essential for international business communication, because the communication skills of the source will be very different from the communication skills of the receiver. The interpretation the source has of the channel, of the content that is being designed, is very different from the interpretation the receiver has of the source, from the interpretation the receiver has of the content, from the interpretation the receiver has of the channel, and that will in turn change the message completely. Now I'll give you another example. I joined a job. I was studying abroad. I came back and I picked up a job. And in that job, the business cards that I had to get made got delayed by a few days. So I was studying in the West, and I came back and I thought that instead of picking up the phone and putting somebody, cornering somebody and saying, why did you not finish this work on time, I should just send an email and request the person who was responsible for getting my business cards designed to get my business cards made and send them to me as soon as possible. So I just sent an email, very polite email, saying that it will be nice if you can please speed up the process. It has been a while. Now, a few minutes after I sent that mail, I got a call from this concerned person, and this person was really upset, and he said, "Madam, you filed a complaint against me." And I said, "What?" He said, "No, why did you have to put this request in writing?" Now, from my point of view, I was just asking this person to make the business cards or to follow up on the business cards that I was supposed to have. I thought I was giving this person, my perception of the email was that an email is a mode of communication that allows the person receiving the email flexibility with the time in which the person has to respond. So I felt that it was a more informal, a more comfortable form of communication than just going and approaching the person personally and asking the person why was this not done, or picking up the phone and getting the person to respond immediately. On the other hand, the way this message was received was that email is a written communication. It is more permanent. There will be a record of it. There will be a record that my business cards were not made on time. And that was not very comfortable for the person getting this message. So when he came to my office, he said, "Madam, you could have just picked up the phone." But I said, "That would have put you on the spot." He says, "But I know what is going on with your business cards." And I said, "I did not want to hurry you up." So my perception of the channel I used to communicate was different from this gentleman's perception of the channel I was using to communicate. And that was what caused a sense of discomfort between us. And the minute I realized it, I said, "I'm sorry, it was not meant to be a written complaint. I just wanted to give you enough time." So that is what we mean when I mean, this is an example of this whole perception about the channel we use to communicate a message. The message was clear. "I have still not received my business cards. Can you please follow up and see what is going on?" Now this message, the way I said it could have made a difference. The channel I used, if I had written a physical letter on rice paper, which is what we do in government organizations, these days we use bond paper, but so if I had put that on paper, it would have made a difference. The way it would have been perceived would have been different. If I had just picked up the phone, informal, formal, so different cultures perceive these things very differently. So this is what we mean when we say that it all comes encased in a context. I have my own perceptions based on my knowledge, my skills, my training, my exposure. I pick a certain collection of words and design my message according to that collection of, according to the exposure I've had to my environment, according to what I've seen in my environment, according to what I have been comfortable with using within my own environment with my unique experiences. Similarly, the person who receives my message has also had his or her own unique experiences with the inputs coming from his or her own unique environments. And that is where the problem happens. And as hard as I try, it is not under my control to really design a message that will fit in perfectly into the other person's comfort zone. I have to find out that, I have to guess that little opening in another person's comfort zone and find out where the person receiving my message shares a context, shares some common platform with me, and I have to design my message in such a way so that the person receiving my message also perceives it more or less in a similar manner, because we are all unique individuals. Every single person on this earth is a very unique individual, and we just need to find similarity in our contexts to send our message across and hope that it goes across as clearly as we want it to, and it gets the job done. Who communicates? Levels of communication. Based on levels of communication, you could have intrapersonal communication. Again, Dance and Larson. Dr. Frank Dance, Dr. Carl Larson were my teachers at the University of Denver. So I like to use what they have said. Lots of good stuff there. So you can look up their work if you want to read about communication. They say that depending on the level, depending on the number of people involved, there are 3 levels of communication. There is intrapersonal communication, which is within one's own head, with one's own self, intrapersonal communication. Interpersonal communication, which is with someone else, and person to group, which is what I'm trying to do here. One person to group. You may say group to group, but when you really break it down, it is usually one person talking, because if 5 people are talking to 20 other people, nobody will be able to hear what is being said. So it's usually one person standing on one side and talking to somebody else. You may say, what about mass communication, these messages? These messages are sent on behalf of an organization, which can be treated as one unit. So it's this unit, you know, it could be person. When we say person, we don't really mean one human being. It could be one unit, any unit. It could be one person, it could be one side of your thought process, it could be one of the opinions you hold as a person. So it applies to intergroup and inter-team communication as well. That's what I'm talking about here. So it is one unit communicating with several other units. Okay. Channels of communication. How do we communicate? We can communicate face to face, verbally and non-verbally. We'll talk about this in future lectures. We can have voice to voice communication, telephone, audio, messaging, etc. And we can have written and digital communication. But of course, you know, these are 3 broad categories. You could find a myriad of categories within these categories. Mixing up these categories, you could have face to voice, you could have voice to video, voice to face only, you could have a million other combinations. But on the very basic level, these are the channels of communication we use. The levels of interaction could be person to person and person to group. The physical environment of the communicative experience could be the home, work, social relationships, etc. And these have been taken from O'Rourke and Singh's book. So these categories are from there. You can look up more. The utterance as a unit of communication. I am giving you these disjointed fundamentals or basics of communication because we will be using each one of these things in further lectures. So let's talk about the utterance as a unit of communication. According to Bakhtin, 1993, the essence of being in the transmission of the emotional volitional aspect of the utterance along with the utterance itself, which means that Bakhtin was a Russian philosopher who gave us these fantastic ideas, great ideas about communication, and the person who introduced me to Bakhtin is a professor called Dr. Roy Wood, who was the chair of the Department of Human Communication Studies at the University of Denver, which is where I studied. So, and he introduced me to Bakhtin, and I absolutely fell in love with his philosophy. So, I am going to refer back to what Bakhtin said. And he said that it is the essence of being in the transmission of the emotional volitional aspect of the utterance along with the utterance itself. The utterance is a unit of communication, which means whatever we say, it could be one word, it could be an entire paragraph. It is the smallest piece of the smallest message that can stand on its own. And according to Bakhtin, the emotional volitional aspect of the utterance is transmitted along with the utterance itself. Emotional aspect means the feelings of the person designing the utterance are carried through the utterance, through the message that is being communicated. And volitional, volition means what the person intends to do with whatever the person is trying to say. So, when we say emotional volitional, we are really talking about what I feel about the message and what do I want this message to do, why am I designing this message, what kind of an effect do I want from my environment as a result of this message. We are all hedonistic people, we don't, and we are all very selfish people. We don't do things for just no reason at all. We do things because we want something in return. We just want to feel nice about ourselves, or we want something from our environment, but we do something because we want something from the environment. Anything. It could be, wanting somebody to act as a sponge for whatever we are saying. So that's what Bakhtin says, that everything that is going on in my mind is actually being transmitted. Now, if the receiver is able to get it, nice. So it is up to the receiver to interpret whatever he or she can. And you may have heard that many people say that I can find out what you're thinking from the way you have said a particular thing. So that is what this is all about. I can find out what you're feeling, I can find out what you want, just from the way you have said a particular thing. I'm not focusing on the words, I'm focusing on the manner in which those words have been presented to me. And that is what Bakhtin's idea about communication talks about, or idea about the utterance talks about. Bakhtin says it is the whole experience of an utterance that gives the utterance its meaning and life and separates it from the unnatural and mechanical. Now, a message is mechanical. You type a message on the computer and that's about it. But the entire experience of the utterance, the entire combination of your emotions, of your intentions behind that utterance is what give the utterance its complete meaning. It is the entire experience of designing that utterance that gives it a meaning that is then transmitted, or that the sender of the message tries to transmit to somebody else, and the receiver receives that meaning, hopefully, in his or her own context, and tries to receive or unconsciously receives the emotions and the intentions associated with it. And this is what differentiates it from some ordinary words written on paper. So this is what real communication is. This is the difference between a message, transmission of a message, and communication. Communication is a lot more. Communication is is so much more than just simple transmission of a message. It is the message with the context and the emotions and the intentions and everything else. How did communication begin? You'll be surprised to know that communication is probably as old as humanity itself. In 3000 BC, I mean, these are the records we have with us. In 3000 BC, and the advice was given to Kagemni, who was the eldest son of Farahuni, on how to speak effectively to people coming from from beyond the border. And this has been documented by Gardiner in 1946. In 2675 BC, in Precepts, Precepts is a treatise on effective communication by Ptahhotep for the pharaoh's son. This has been documented by Hansen in 1981. These people are anthropologists, historians. So these people have been looking at, they were not looking for communication per se, but this is where I found evidence of where communication really started. And if you go through the documents in history, you will realize that intercultural communication has been practiced. People have been trained in intercultural, international business communication. Of course, the terminology is fairly new, but people have been trained in international business communication for centuries, and this training began to help the royals to deal with royals from other countries, from beyond their own borders, to deal with people from beyond their own borders. And initially the royal families were the ones that were trained in international business communication or intercultural communication. Okay, so it started as international business communication, and now we talk about intercultural communication, but we will come to that in another part of this course. Now let's talk a little bit about business communication and why it's important. According to Squires, and of course that paper covers a lot more than what this is. Squires wrote a paper called Management as a Professional Discipline, and according to that paper, managers have some functions. They do a few things in their daily lives. Of course, this is not the entire list of the kinds of things managers do, but this covers pretty much most of whatever managers do. So according to Squires, the functions of managers are to motivate, to direct, to allocate, to coordinate, to monitor, to evaluate, to plan, to react, and to develop. And how do managers do what they do? They engage in certain processes. So managers use certain processes to carry out these functions, and the processes managers engage in are instructional processes, which is teaching, training, all that stuff, technical processes, personal processes, interpersonal processes, entrepreneurial processes, which means coming up with new ideas, designing new stuff, political processes, administrative processes, financial processes, and legal processes. And most of the other processes can be put into one or several of these categories. And what affects what they do is the contingencies. And these contingencies are things that happen all of a sudden. Contingencies are unplanned events, and we say contingency plan, which is an oxymoron. A contingency by definition is something that happens without warning. We can plan, we can do our homework, we can plan for a contingency, but we cannot really anticipate the entire contingency as a whole. And these contingencies, things that can really change without notice, could be the mission of the organization, and in the mission it could be the nature of the mission, it could be the unity of the mission, unity of the different parts of the mission, and the stability of the mission itself. Another contingency could occur in the organization itself, in the size, structure and culture of the organization. Downsizing, right sizing the organization could happen. The structure could change. You could have more technical people, you could have more back office operations, you could have other stuff coming in. The culture of the organization could change. You could have traditionally organizations in India were very vertical. These days they are slowly moving to a horizontal, flatter type of structure where the roles are very clearly defined. It's all about achieving goals and much less about who's answerable to whom. That is still there, but those levels have come down. So the culture is changing, or one area of, or one plant or one office of the organization could be very, very vertical, and the other area or other section of the organization could be very horizontal. So things may change because of stuff going on in the environment. You could have mergers, you could have acquisitions, you could have people leaving suddenly because newer opportunities have come up. So these are contingencies that happen. The environment could also be a contingency, which is another contingency is with the environment. You could have regulatory contingencies, which means the rules could change, the laws could change, the policies could change. You could have economic contingencies. We had a crash in 2007. The economy of the entire world came down, and so this was something that people should have known, but I'm guessing a lot of our senior economists knew what was going on, but they were hoping for the best, they were planning, but still a lot of things could not be dealt with. You could have social, the social environment could change drastically. So these are the contingencies that can come up in the environment that can in turn affect what managers do and how they do their work, and that will in turn affect the way they communicate. The reason I'm telling you this is I'm hoping that you are going through this course because you want some sort of qualification, or you are getting some sort of training in management or business administration, and you must never lose sight of what you are doing and why you are doing it. So if you're planning to be a manager or an administrator, you must know what managers do, you must know how they do what they do, and you must also know what can affect what they do, so that you can then learn what to take from these classes, what to take from these courses. If you have your goal clear, at that point it will be easier for you to decide what to receive from whatever is being taught to you, and that's why I'm covering all this. So a manager's job, now based on these slides, this is my own interpretation, that a manager's job is really to function where the processes and functions is to perform really well in an environment where the processes of the manager engages in and the functions of a manager's job are constantly being affected, constantly being impacted by the contingencies in the manager's environment, and these in turn have a bearing on the goals of the organization that the manager is a part of. And this is the crux of why we are going through this course. Now let me come to the significance of the course on intercultural communication, the course on international business communication, and I'll tell you why this course was considered to be very, very important. If you are planning a degree, if you are planning some training in business administration, you will realize that the world has become smaller. You must have realized that things in your environment are constantly changing, and I'm assuming that if you are in India and if you're listening to this lecture, you will realize that India is as intercultural as it gets. Every 200 kilometers, the language of the people changes. Every 200 kilometers, the way people wear their clothes changes. Every 200 kilometers, the kind of food people eat changes traditionally at least. These days, of course, Coke and Uncle Chips are available everywhere and everybody has cell phones. But still, the culture is so different. The culture of every state in India is so different from every other state. And people outside India have a hard time realizing that. They think that all of us are exactly the same. We are not the same. We are as diverse as a country gets, which means that everybody we interact with could possibly be coming from very, very different backgrounds. Everybody we interact with could possibly be belonging to very, very different environments, which means that going back to Berlow's model, you will realize, let me just go back to Berlow's model. You will realize that this culture part is very different. The social system is very different. The social system and culture of the sender of the message will be very different from the social system and the culture of the receiver of the message. And this is something that we are dealing with on a constant basis in India. And this is why a training in international business communication is very important. Within India, we have so much of diversity. Now, when we go out, we are constantly interacting with people from other cultures, from other countries. 20 years ago, we are having this recording in 2010. This is October of 2010. And say 20 years ago, going abroad was a big thing. We did not have, even traveling by air within the country was a big thing. But these days, pretty much everybody who has a reasonably decent job has a passport and usually one or more stamps, visa stamps. And pretty much everybody with a master's degree has traveled by air, which means we are more well connected to people living in far off places. Even if we don't travel abroad, because of the nature of our jobs, we are constantly interacting with people from different cultures, from different countries, from different backgrounds, which is what makes this entire course very, very important. Thank you.